This video contains frank, but not gratuitous discussions of mental health and suicide. If that's not your jam, get out while you can. It also contains discussions of this game's story, which will put you in real danger of dying of boredom. You have been warned. Massive spoilers ahead for Bloober's Blair Witch, and the 1999 Blair Witch Project movie. Complete spoilers. I'll also be spoiling some of the themes of Madison and Silent Hill 2, either directly or loosely within the first few minutes of this video. If you want to avoid those spoilers, skip to the timestamp on screen. So there's a major crutch a lot of games have been relying on lately, typically in the sphere of psychological horror, but occasionally survival horror and games in the thriller genre have dabbled in this too, and I, a nobody, have decided that it's really annoying and I would love it if it stopped. And so, at least by my standards, it is deemed the cardinal sin of video game writing. And that cardinal sin is suicide endings. There are two reasons for this. The first reason is just that it's lazy. Back when books used to get put through the ringer for the "it was all a dream" ending, it was a way to quickly wrap up a story without needing to actually properly resolve anything. You smack a quick ending in, you wipe your sticky hands off in your dungarees, and you fuck up outside to play, speedrunning primary school. Any story with a suicide ending is usually just tagged as a cliffhanger, and then just abandoned then and there by critique. Sometimes low-tier publications like GameRanks, Screen Rant, and The Gaming Bible will post clickbait articles that you have to scroll down past thousands of banner ads to reach the bottom of, that will just kind of vaguely but desperately speculate towards hidden clues about the sequel to this game when, spoiler alert, there is no sequel, they just ran out of money or something. Characters don't need to overcome anything, they don't need to win, they don't need to figure out how to escape or beat the big bad, they don't even really need to lose. They don't need to be killed by the big bad either, meaning there's often no need for an impactful final face-off. A first-person death scene saves time, effort, and money on animations, voice acting, and most importantly, good writing. The story doesn't need to wind down to reach a final act, to cycle back on itself, and finally, it doesn't need to be clever. Because honestly, why do you need to be clever when you can just have your character off themselves without rhyme or reason? Yeah, that's impactful. Good work. See you in the pub. It's frustrating, often wheeled out for the sake of shock value or to ensure they're referred to by an obscure Rotten Tomatoes critic as a story that tackles dark themes. It's often done over the course of a few moments in a final cutscene, almost always with zero build-up, foreshadowing, or indication that your character ever wanted to go that way, and then the game just cuts to black, smiling at you eagerly, like a man who's just fumbled in your coochie for 2.5 minutes, like he's trying to get some lip balm out of the bottom, and you just lie there wondering why you made the effort to drive over in the first place. In the case of Madison, for example, your character just randomly gets possessed and kills themselves. I discussed it further in my video on the topic, you can check it out linked in the description below, but it was lazy and rushed. Throughout the game, you're setting up a ritual, and the final item you need is your own father's head. It's even written in your little diary, Dad's head. Yet, about 4 minutes before the game's literal ending, you finish the final gameplay sequence and suddenly find out Dad's head has been scribbled out in your little diary, to be replaced by the words, hanged son. And then your character just gets up, walks over to a chair with a hanging noose, and hangs himself. One commenter absolutely insisted to me, no, you don't understand. It makes sense for Madison, because Luca has to do it. He's possessed in the final moments, and the demon makes him kill himself. Sure, it's cheap in other games, but in this game it makes complete sense. Luca was forced to. No, well-intentioned person. Luca does it because the writers made him do it. And in the case of Madison, and I do discuss it a bit further in that video if you'd rather just go and watch that and catch up on what I'm saying, it is a rushed, cobbled together ending that is entirely unearned and not even remotely foreshadowed. The main character just hops up on a chair and hangs himself, having had no prior inkling to do so whatsoever. Yeah, the noose is there hanging over the chair from the start of the game. A lot of people argue that that is foreshadowing, and maybe it is, but it's also the kind of bollocks foreshadowing, because it's a detail that was added in, I think, quite late into production to account for this ending and to pretend that the ending is being foreshadowed. But now, with that noose there, if you look at the story of Madison under any level of scrutiny, it just completely falls apart. Yeah, Madison's main character is possessed, but there are better ways to go about that than he suddenly decides to hang himself. It was clearly just like a last-minute spitballs by some writers that were just so coked out of their mind that I'm stunned that they didn't just come up with an enemy that feeds on the fear of children, has lights in their throat, and needs to be killed by the power of, like, friendship. Like doing your homework on the bus to school, I can see where the writers were getting knocked about. There are pens all over the place and the pages are crinkled from where they quickly crammed it into their bag before they stopped. I can't stand it. The first time I saw it, yeah, shocking, cool. Now it's a narrative cop-out so weak and so overdone that they may as well have just cut to credits instead, with a big pop-up just saying, sorry, we couldn't figure out how to end the story. It would at least wrap things up with dignity. The second reason why I hate suicide endings in games is because they're just poor taste. In the best case scenario, we have characters that are actually struggling with their mental health. And still, I think it's very difficult, if not almost entirely impossible, to condense years and months of mental illness and trauma and depression into a 6 to 20 hour game and still have it feel believable that the only option for this character would be for them to kill themselves. Films and TV have kind of an advantage here because you don't need to know the character's innermost thoughts, but in gaming we become that character. So we need to be fully invested in what that character is doing, and I think often it's very difficult to reach that same level of empathy when a character suddenly decides to commit suicide in a game. It just seems to always fall short. And that's not to say it's impossible. 2 games off the top of my head that I know have done this really well are Silent Hill 2, with the in-water ending, which is very bittersweet, very sad, and although this isn't a spoiler because this isn't how the game goes, but I feel like Rule of Rose is also really good at kind of instilling that fear of misery, isolation. Your character can't leave the area she's in, she's too young to do anything about her situation. If Rule of Rose wanted to go in that direction, I think they probably could have pulled it off really well. However, in the worst case scenario, we have characters that are completely mentally sound. And then suddenly they'll just get really sad, or suddenly they'll just get possessed, or suddenly they'll just learn something and suddenly decide that they need to kill themselves. And it just becomes this shocking and unreasonably insensitive display of the feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and helplessness that I feel would accompany somebody who actually was thinking of taking that choice. You know, it's cheap, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Often games will try and walk the line. They'll imply the character is struggling with something, be it bipolar disorder, the crushing weight of childhood trauma, or the heavy effects of PTSD, but even then, the ending often just blasts out of nowhere in something you could describe as an active insult against its audience. Don't get me wrong, I think it's possible to do these endings well. I've often heralded Silent Hill 2's in-water ending as an ending that captures the bitterness of such a death very well, after an earned build-up and a well-written story. It's subtle too, just a blue screen with bubbles floating up, only the most observant players realising that the player character James has driven his car into the lake. Angela's story in that game is also deeply difficult to watch, but again earned, well written and subtle, not gratuitous. It gave the moment the gravitas and respect it deserved. I talk about these scenes in my video on The Medium, coincidentally also a video game made by Bloober, which you're welcome to check out if you want. God, I'm plugging a lot of videos today. Massive apologies for that, but these themes just come up a lot in the games I cover. But before you say, oh not every game has to be Harvest Moon. If you're so scared of dark themes, then just grow up. Sometimes stories don't have happy endings. I know, believe me, I know. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I don't think that these themes don't have a place in games. I've already listed a few examples of games I thought did this really well, but there are always people in the comments that are like, oh Mert, if you don't like bad things in games, then just play Animal Crossing all day. Games are for dark themes. I know. I don't think that these themes are impossible. I just think that they have become extremely easy cop-outs for stories that take themselves too seriously, who think that they are fully equipped to be grappling with things like this, stories that run out of time, budget, or effort. Or stories that just really need to wrap up some plot holes and just need to come up with a quick ending. Then they drop the game on its head and they sprint off to the next project. Mental health has almost become like a fantasy setting for writers. An alternative universe where anything is physically possible as long as it is caused by a character's mental deterioration. Like some kind of bleak, soft magic system. It's basically a setting by this point. It's like Middle-earth, except shit and boring, and everybody's vision goes like blurry and hazy for a little bit for some reason. These mental health settings are used to contrive situations where the unexplainable can happen, and it doesn't need to be explained, and it's also dark and edgy because it's about mental health. But I think writers often forget that there are people in the world who are dealing with this kind of shit all the time. And mental health struggles so severe that you are driven to suicide aren't your little, playground for you to experiment in and spitball ideas in. They're not your toys to just pick up and put down whenever you've decided that you want to write something edgy. Because often these writers do a massive disservice to mental health. Sure, you know, if you have your own experiences with mental health, then write them. I'm sure you could look in the comments now, hint hint, and see thousands of good examples of games that deal with mental health really well. But if you have no idea what it's like to suffer mental illness and suicide ideation, then maybe don't take creative liberty in interpreting it however suits you best and like making a QuickTime event out of it, for example. And they always do this thing where the screen goes blurry, like your character's blinked and their contact lenses have smudged. But hey, no need to make something good as long as it's dark, right? Whatever gets audiences talking, all press is good press and whatnot. Well, that brings us neatly to Bloober's Blair Witch game and the cardinal sin of gaming. Before I begin, if you enjoy this video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. I talk about all sorts of gaming content, reviews, discussions, sometimes other media like films, so if that sounds like something you'd like more of, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss another upload. Furthermore, thank you to my patrons for their continued support. Go check out my Patreon for awesome pledge rewards and community goals, including a goal to reach my next video, which will cover why 13 Reasons Why is an insult to modern television, for much the same reasons we'll talk about today. Patrons of any tier also get access to 5-minute reviews, such as the ones I've already written on Hades, Overwatch, Cuphead, and The Last of Us Part 1, which is coming out later this month, so check them out. Although if you don't want to pledge, I will make compilations of those reviews once every few months or so and post them on my channel if you'd rather wait and watch them for free. With that out of the way, let's get on with it. Bloober's Blair Witch game started with a trigger warning. I was looking away from the screen slightly too long to read in time, as I was clicking quickly through opening screens assuming they were all pre-game credits and publisher logos. So yeah, I missed that. Then I was presented with a weird kind of meta gameplay warning. The future's not set in stone, the game warned me. Your humanity will be judged. You are being watched. With flashbacks to Telltale's The Walking Dead in mind, I wondered how this game might imply that my actions have consequences, while still continuing to cart me along the exact same narrative no matter which choices I picked. That is entirely unchanged depending on which choices I picked, besides a few lines of dialogue here and there, culminating in 2 binary endings that just have slightly different dialogue and maybe a few different things happening in the lead up. But even then I found that I would be giving Bloober's Blair Witch a bit too much credit. Sure, this game has a good and a bad ending. Some characters in the game will have different endings and different pieces of dialogue depending on how you treat them, but I mean, that's not an exception in games. Plus, these tend to come down to like mere seconds of altered dialogue each, and since all of your conversations happen over the phone with other characters, you can literally imagine like a flag, yes, no, happy.mp4, sad.mp4, and that is the difference. What is it with games insisting that they are watching, judging, and adapting to your every move? Because I mean, when you do that, all you're doing is drawing immense attention to your flimsy inability to write a good branching story. Now, for the record, I have played this game before. I won't pretend I went into this blind. I referenced my time with this game in my video on the Medium. The basis for the story is very simple. A 9-year-old boy, Peter Shannon, went missing the previous Saturday afternoon, and there's a search party in a forest called Black Hills Forest. We learn that Peter is one of a string of missing persons cases dating all the way back to 1994, when a group of students got lost in the forest, referring to the original film The Blair Witch Project, released in 1999, but obviously set in 1994. This game is set in 1996. Are you still following? Fantastic. Ellis, our main character, is driving towards the site of the search with a dashboard covered in junk and an old cigarette packet when he gets a call from a woman called Jess. He explains that he's going to join the search, and weirdly she sounds very hesitant. She's not impressed at all with this news, and when Ellis probes her as to why, she says, "You know what, maybe I shouldn't have called." "Yeah, well, hang up then, Jess. Ellis shouldn't be on his phone while driving anyway." Arriving at the site of the search, Ellis gets out of his car with his dog Bullet, but finds the site empty. Everybody's already left, but there's a note in the sheriff's car reading, "I've heard Ellis is interested in the search. Just say no, he's damaged goods as far as I'm concerned." Reading this rudeness and deciding to speak to the sheriff directly, Billy Big Balls Ellis walkie-talkies the man himself, who, now trapped on the phone with Ellis, has a somewhat changed tune. He tries to reassure Ellis that he isn't required to be there, just because he, Peter, is his brother, presumably referring to someone that Ellis had a past of some kind with, or let down, and Ellis now seems to feel he owes for the effort of searching for Peter. The sheriff asks Ellis if he's sure unsure regarding Ellis's vaguely referenced mental health problems, and Ellis assures him that he's fine. So the setting of this is very clear. Ellis is clearly struggling with his mental health in some so far undefined capacity, but it seems to be significant enough that Jess, as we learn, his ex-wife, is extremely concerned about him even leaving his house, and the sheriff thinks he'll be more of a liability than anything else. I think so far this comes across as an effective storytelling technique and a good starting dynamic for our main characters. Ellis is completely underestimated because of his mental health. Jess is super condescending to him. She only calls him to tell him how much she literally doubts his ability to do anything. And the sheriff is absurdly two-faced. He's so rude about Ellis, but as soon as Ellis gets him on the phone, the sheriff is really polite and really nice to him. He's kind of like the co-worker who reports you to your boss because you take your lunch at 1:30 until 2:30 instead of 1 till 2, and then pretends to wax shocked when you have to go into your boss's office and explain yourself. Yes, that happened to me once. I was fucking furious. You can just smell the bitchiness on them. Both of these people think Ellis is completely incapable, and I think it functions really effectively to make you as the player feel frustrated as well. Just like Ellis, you feel belittled and like you're being treated like a kid. You're patronized and underestimated and shoved away so that you don't cause trouble for the adults who are just trying to do adult things. I've never played a game like this before with these kinds of characters and relationships, and I think it's really, really effective. It immediately puts you right in Ellis's shoes, and you immediately are like, yeah, come on Ellis, let's go prove them wrong, let's go find this kid. But let's see how it plays out. As we head into the woods, we are introduced to another pretty interesting mechanic, Bullet. And not the kind of bullet your mum uses, no. Bullet, your canine companion, can make himself very useful. He can bark and alert you of threats with his body language, but as the pop-up tells us, he can't deal with threats himself. How you treat Bullet affects his later behaviour, and staying close to him prevents you from feeling isolated, keeping your own mental health stable, which basically just keeps the screen from going really flickery. Just a shame his AI can utterly botch in the wrong circumstances. I watched that dog get stuck in an old rusted pickup truck, trying to path through tree stumps and abandoned litter, and ultimately just standing still for minutes at a time while the game tried to figure out alternative routes for him. Other than that, he was okay, but he was stuck on that pickup truck for several minutes. He didn't seem to respond to commands either, and then he suddenly would, and he's the kind of escort NPC where he just randomly stops still and you're unsure of whether it's because you need to be walking a certain distance behind him or a certain distance in front of him, or whether you need to activate something by speaking to him or looking around. He's an awesome mechanic in concept, but in practice he's very exhausting. Bullet can pick up rubbish if you tell him to seek, and when he bought me a cigarette packet of the same brand as the one in Ellis's car, I was like, oh yeah, here we go, here's the twist. As you try and steer this shoebox of a dog through thick underbrush, you hear the search party saying that the woods are cursed. If you don't leave before nightfall, you don't leave at all. They claim the curse originated during the Revolutionary War, when a witch was caught and hung on a tree in the woods. Some of the search party radio over asking, did anyone check that place? Oh, that place, someone asks. Yeah, that place is the first place we look. I assume they're referring to either the hanged tree or the basement from the film. If you've not seen the original Blair Witch Project movie, there are some references in this game that will absolutely fly over your head, and maybe even seem a little bit weird. So just to briefly explain what I mean by the basement, at the end of the film, the two remaining characters are taken into a basement and murdered as a pair, attracted by the screams of their missing friend. However, the way the witch in the film operated was by killing people as pairs, which is kind of lucky since there were two people left. And what she would do is she would take one person into the corner and have them face the corner, and she would kill the other person behind them, so they would listen to that person being murdered behind them. And then the person in the corner would be killed. So keep that in mind. And yeah, there are a lot of theories about whether or not there is actually even a witch in the Blair Witch, but bear with me. So I assumed playing this game that when they referred to like that place, they were referring to the basement. As Ellis wanders the forest, he calls Jess. We're easily less than 15 minutes into this game, and this is our third or fourth call already. There are texts too. The story and character development of this game relies so hard on phone calls and walkie-talkie communication, during which your character walks really slowly and aimlessly around a very samey forest, and as you can imagine, it starts to get really, really boring. Jess is still hesitant about Ellis being out of his house, but he overplays his calmness to try and appease her, rather than telling her to mind her business and drag her sorry ass out here to help if she really cares that much. This search means a lot to me, he assures her, and Jess reminds him that she's on his side, sure thing. When Ellis finds Peter's cap in a little cave in the woods, the sheriff is impressed and says to stay there, the search party will be over in a minute, but Ellis doesn't want to. Bullet now has Peter's scent, so he feels it would be better matter if he ran ahead and let the search party know his location as he follows Peter's trail. Running after Bullet, Ellis soon loses sight of his dog and slips down some cliff on his arse. Getting to his feet, he begins to panic. Ellis has heart palpitations, his vision flickers, and the edges blur and darken. He falls to his knees and starts to have some kind of episode when suddenly Bullet appears out of nowhere. So clearly whatever is affecting Ellis is so significant that even an uptick of nerves is enough to have him on the verge of a severe breakdown. At this point, I started to think that maybe he should wait for the sheriff, but I guess we wouldn't have a story then.
Baltimore crows. That's Peter's cap. Good boy. We need to hurry. Can you follow the scent? Attaboy! Go get it! Ellis to base. I found Peter's cap.
You did? Well, great job, Ellis. Just stay where you are. We'll join up with you and keep searching from there.
Ellis to base. Near a dead white tree.
The white tree you were telling us about. I found it. It's really here.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it be? Anyway, I'm nearby, so just wait for me there, okay? Let's go back, Bullet. Ellis to base. Landing, where are you?
Still under the tree.
But so am I.
Jess is still phoning every 8 seconds to ask if Ellis is okay, and he snaps hard at her and she seems a bit bummed, but honestly, fuck it. She was getting on my nerves so badly by this point. I would definitely get aggy too if someone was constantly ringing me just to doubt whether I'd be okay. Just subtweet me, Jess. I don't care to hear your constant stream of consciousness. Ellis finds a small encampment with a video camera. Upon picking it up, he experiences flashbacks. He sees Jess with a Crime Watch blur on her face, insisting he needs help. He sees her say that she can't do this anymore. Ellis complains, "I see the way you look at me, like I'm a fucking loser." We see him sat in the bathroom with a gun, and then we see him meeting Bullet, who the police officer at the desk, the sheriff, says he's also been through a lot. Just your classic absolute shotgun shell to the face of context, but fairly straightforward, I suppose. Ellis wakes up in a tent several hours later as the sun begins to set. Uh-oh. The sheriff is very annoyed. Since Ellis obviously went silent hours ago, they assumed he'd gotten hurt or gone missing himself, and the whole search party had to derail their search to keep an eye out for Ellis too. The sheriff shouts at Ellis, and again, Ellis insists on going on to keep searching for Peter. Bad move, my guy. I was feeling for you when they were underestimating you, but now you're just putting other people in danger for the sake of your own pride. Hubris, I mean Ellis, wheels off into the forest and picks up the camera he found previously, the one that had triggered his flashbacks. The game introduces a new mechanic here. You rewind and fast forward through tapes you find, which causes things to materialize in reality. So it's kind of like a simple puzzle, kind of, except it's just a switch that you can turn on and off to alter variables around you, except there's like one variable. As we walk, we find a bundle of sticks hanging from a tree, a human effigy, the kind seen in the original movie. I wonder how much of the premises of the original movie they'll bother to explain, or if they'll just assume you've seen it. I mean, it is a 23-year-old film at this point. It's not a crazy concept that someone might play this with absolutely no prior knowledge of the franchise. I don't think I would have expected anybody who played this game to have also seen the film. I also don't expect people to take an interest in this game specifically because of the film either. There are a lot of reasons why a game like this might pique somebody's interest, and I imagine that the number of people who actually have seen this film probably fall into a minority. You know, it might only be 49%, but it's still a minority. And the expectation this game has that everybody who's playing it will have seen the film as well, or at least understand many of the references, I think is a bit far-fetched for a game that is old enough to own a house. People might gravitate towards this game because they like other Bloober titles, God forbid, although Observer was really good. I don't know which team worked on that, but it was a surprising diamond in the rough for Bloober. They might like the idea of psychological horror, they might like the idea of magical horror since it's called the Blair Witch. They might just have seen it on sale and thought it looked really intriguing. They might be looking for horror games to play by themselves or on stream. They might have had a friend recommend it to them. So there are a lot of different reasons why I think somebody might have just picked up this game on a whim, but the game still doesn't really bother to do any explaining to you or doesn't bother to kind of backtrack in any way to let you understand what's going on. The effigy has a photo in it of a woman called Olga, a photo of her standing in the corner of the basement just like in the movie, except the existence of the photo implies that the first victim took the photo that or the witch themselves before they killed the second victim. Or, if you've not seen the film, it doesn't imply anything, it's just a photo of somebody's bag. And I'm pretty sure they reused the same photo like 50 times for some reason. The sheriff contacts Ellis again, and Ellis tells him to pass the old campsite and head north. But the sheriff tells him that he's been through that area. There is no campsite. Ellis insists he'll keep heading north, whatever that means to the poor sheriff. Ellis is going off on his own and getting lost and getting hurt and passing out, and he's the sheriff's responsibility now, so I kind of understand his frustration. The search party have utterly zero patience for Ellis's shenanigans too, several of them deciding to go home as the night starts to descend, not wanting to wander this forest for ages, looking for a man who keeps running off even further into the woods, telling them he's by an old white tree in a forest. Can you find anything more notable, my dude? Any landmarks? Ellis finds said weird white tree with strange roots, presumably the tree the witch themselves was hung from, and as he wanders past, he finds a series of trenches, like First World War trenches. He inquires about these to the sheriff, who is obviously skeptical that such a thing exists, considering there's not been any conflict in a long time, if at all, but Ellis gets defensive, insisting he knows what he sees. That poor sheriff. When Ellis finds a tape of Peter being led away by the kidnapper, it materializes a little baseball on the floor. The tapes make things happen in the real world, Ellis insists to an extremely guarded sheriff, who wants Ellis to wait for him, and Ellis again refuses. Even early on, it was apparent that we were dealing with an unreliable narrator. But when I heard the voice on the tape and realised that it was basically just Ellis's voice actor speaking in a slightly lower tone of voice, I was absolutely sure. Also, Ellis is the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine from Thomas and Friends, so if you close your eyes, this is just a vastly different experience. And he was additional voices in Divinity Original Sin and Ghost Recon Wildlands. I don't know if this game was intending to pull a very elaborate double bluff by making it very obvious that Ellis is the one that is kidnapping the children, or if it feels like it just needs to be super obvious, and kind of relying on that initial surge of support we felt for the patronised underdog Ellis in the prologue to be what carries us through the game. But by this point, I kind of felt a bit embarrassed for Ellis, like watching the village drunk piss himself on the bar stool and then try and stagger home. I felt bad for him. So there's a bunker here that has a weird lock, but on my second playthrough I knew the combination, so I dropped it in early. When my brother played it, he just brute forced it. There's a note here that says they're scared of light or some shit, it hurts them or whatever, and just wow. I don't think this game can go 5 minutes without using a tired horror trope. According to a radio found in said bunker, missing Peter Shannon was found after 3 days of search, wandering alone on the road, his disappearance likely due to an unknown third party. On my second playthrough, even finding this first, Ellis doesn't even slightly respond to it. He doesn't have any dialogue for this, and you can just leave and carry on with the game. Some news outlets, probably for clickbait purposes, have the gall to call this a secret hidden ending, despite it not being an ending at all. This is definitely a shit addition, being that it has literally no impact on anything whatsoever. My brother mentioned an ending where you can find out that Peter was stabbed to death. I didn't see this one myself, but it's yet another example. Ellis's dialogue doesn't change, even if you find this. His dialogue will continue to be about needing to find this kid, and how he, Ellis, is absolutely crucial to this search for Peter Shannon. So I do wonder why the bunker was placed so early with a combination that is the same between playthroughs. Why not put the bunker later? Why not give it a randomly generated combination that is different between playthroughs so that you can't go there early? It's weird to reward returning players or players that just brute force the lock because it's not that difficult by just letting them into the bunker right off the bat and then not giving them any actual feedback or game alterations for finding this early. As I wandered the trenches, I started to come to a horrendous realisation. This game is absurdly boring, crazy boring, a basic walking simulator at best, where story is progressed almost entirely through listening to phone conversations, which are definitely the most boring way to progress a story. The only mechanics so far have been heavily scripted and absolutely ingrained into the step-by-step of the story, to the point where they feel more like a QuickTime event than they do a mechanic. Despite being in a forest, it became increasingly apparent that I was in a dead linear corridor. The forest was pretty and the graphics are nice and the atmosphere is very basic. The visuals are cool, but ultimately for a psychological horror, they're very vanilla, and even by this point, it was a chore to continue, so I put the game down for 2 weeks. Ellis picks up a baseball, the one from the tape, and shows the scent to Bullet. Shows? Demonstrates? Previews? I don't know how you convey a smell, but you know what I mean. Anyway, he shows Bullet, who immediately starts walking in circles. After the radio broadcast, I presumed it might end differently here because Ellis now knows the baseball smells like Peter's kidnapper, who I assume is Ellis, and Ellis might have some different dialogue, but no. Also, I didn't know whether or not Bullet was walking in circles because his AI had bugged. After some time of shouting "heal" and "Bullet" and "come on boy," Bullet started barking. Returning to the scary tree, we're suddenly hit with an illumination, a dirty jump scare, and Ellis freaks out. Bullet began barking into the darkness, and there were some figures flying around in the bushes. Just in case you're unsure about what to do, there's another reminder to use your torch to fight them, as Ellis picks up a recording with obviously himself talking on the other end of it about how you need to use the light to stay safe. Ellis had his weird palpitations again, his flickering vision, and I flashed my flashlight at the monsters. They died. The sequence is done. Okay. We reach a bridge, but can't cross it. It's destroyed, and get a call from the sheriff, who has actually, to his own surprise, found the white tree. He's confused, and Ellis is confused as to why the sheriff is confused, and the call ends there. God, so communicative, you guys. I'm so proud of you. What a back and forth. What a bond. Ellis returns to the tree and calls the sheriff to tell him he's back, but the sheriff is annoyed now. He's also under the tree, but Ellis isn't there with him. They're apparently both in the same place, but neither can see each other. The sheriff seems to think this is a cruel joke, which probably betrays his own low bar for humour, because I don't quite understand what he means by that. The sheriff gets annoyed, telling Ellis it was a mistake to let Ellis join the party, that he wanted to help him redeem himself in the eyes of the mistrustful villagers, and Ellis gets angry as he detects the sheriff thinks he's crazy. I am the only person in this forest who is even remotely close to finding that goddamn kid, screams Ellis. But like, dude, we heard on the radio that he's been found. Were we not supposed to find that yet? You get a text telling you to keep moving, as enemies will find you when you're standing still. And I do have to wonder how much they thought people would just be standing still in the forest the entire playtime. Sometimes the very linear game expects you to go a very specific way, so it will route some enemies down a path that you just miss by pure accident, sprinting about in the woods with your dick in your hands. Ellis walks back into the forest and finds what was previously a wrecked van and is now brand new, so presumably we're in the past, or we were in the future before? I don't know. There's a tickle of time dilation, or assumed time dilation, in the original Blair Witch movie. It's suggested, but never really proven. I do really like the way that film messes with our expectations. The terrible Blair Witch sequel that was released in like 2016 or something does tons with this though, so I guess that's where they got this inspiration. Turn on the headlights, said a voice from our walkie-talkie, but like it's absolutely Ellis's voice. This has to be a double bluff, I thought, fishing around for the car keys. The radio whacks on, and a film critic called John is talking about a black and white documentary shot on the topic of mental wards in the 60s, potentially a reference to a film itself, or maybe a clue towards Ellis's past, only he seems to be about 40 in 1996, so unless he was incarcerated at 10 years old, your guess is as good as mine. Almost comically, the film critic finishes his radio speech by saying, "Remember, 1 in 20 people will spend time in a mental institution. Who knows? Maybe it's you. Good night." And then he signs off in a way I couldn't tell was supposed to be funny. Definitely a so bad it's good moment, like an old Goosebumps voiceover, but tonally it jarred very violently with the atmosphere of the game, so I just looked past it. The radio picks up a happy woman running some kind of trivia challenge, but her voice turns demonic when she asks today's question, "What have you done, Ellis?" She tells Ellis that he's won a prize, the combination to the aforementioned bunker door. No thanks, bitch, I already have it. Even if you've unlocked the bunker door already, Ellis doesn't recognise this. Fixing the fuses in the car causes it to suddenly be daylight again. I interpreted it as Ellis having an episode that caused him to lose time or something, so it appeared to suddenly blink to day, whereas he'd disassociated for several hours. Bullet doesn't acknowledge it, but Ellis goes, "How? Gosh, I'm really losing it this time, buddy," with all the ounce of concern you'd expect a man with a history of debilitating mental illness stranded in the woods to approach a sudden loss of time with. At this point, you wonder if the dog is even real. Feel like Bullet also doesn't exist, like he's a constant reminder of the army or something. My brother told me his theory that Bullet was a dog he kept in Iraq or wherever he was, who died and he couldn't let go of. We checked the phone to find 3 missed texts and a missed call from Jess, and I called her back. Ellis says in one of the most ham-fisted lines ever that they're stuck in a perpetual cycle of bullshit. Foreshadowing! As the story wears on, we find footprints, one barefoot and one heavy-set male. Hey Ellis. What's your bench? The footprints led us to a dead body, buried beneath some branches. It's the sheriff! Not only dead, but his face has been skinned post-mortem. Lanning is tough, experienced, Ellis comments. He wouldn't let the killer surprise him. It has to be somebody he knew. Picking up a nearby tape, we hear again Ellis's own voice on it. He walks on, proclaiming he'll find the man who did this heinous crime, while I sat there rubbing my head with confusion. Because, the way I see it, there are 2 possible ways to interpret the way this game is written. So first of all, we have the the generous reading. The generous reading says, the game obviously wants us to know that Ellis is the killer. It's just pretending to drip feed us clues and be about a murder mystery, when actually it's just trying to highlight and subvert the silliness of these tropes. There's no twist, not in a story sense, but the twist is instead about unpacking the depths of Ellis's denial and delusion, when we can see the truth as clear as day. Secondly, there is the cynical reading. And the cynical reading is that Bloober's Blair Witch is a story that thinks it is much cleverer than it is, and I'm kind of leaning towards this one. Why? Well, I feel like it's too obvious. The game makes no real effort to muddy the waters or obscure the clues at all. It gives us a lot of clues, all very accessible, found throughout the story. My immediate instinct was to think, oh yeah, I figured this out, at which point my interest in unravelling this murder mystery absolutely capsized. I was no longer even remotely interested in watching a man struggle with his mental illness, run around in a forest screaming about witches anymore. But I mean, it would also be flippant to review this game based on the first 45 minutes, so I did fully intend to finish this. Writing-wise, it's a gamble. If other players are like me, and yeah, they probably aren't, many of them probably aren't, that's fine. But if they are, they'll probably put the game down pretty early into it. Especially if they're bored by the game, which is a very real possibility. With no intrigue left, no mystery to unpack. What is the draw in going on besides the pure misery porn of watching a mentally ill man stagger around in the forest screaming into a walkie-talkie? Furthermore, if they were to drip feed us all these clues and then just quickly swap the twist at the end, it would be cheap. I think considering the seriousness of the themes this game is stepping into, mental illness, extreme PTSD, returning veterans, cycles of abuse, and ultimately suicide, making this some kind of Scooby-Doo reveal is tonally very ham-fisted. I imagine the writing team did want to do their themes due diligence and portray them fully, and for that reason I do feel that this is a story played straight, but it's a story woefully inadequately told, which leads me to my next reason. We were told 3 times by 3 different sources that you need to use the light to kill the effigies, or walk past them or whatever. But I think that in this game where your only weapon is a torch and all other similar games have this exact light kills monsters mechanic, it's a stretch to assume that we'd need to be told even once. I do know that killing the effigies leads to the bad ending, but I'll talk about that later. Sure, yeah, people can be new to gaming, maybe this is their first game, yeah, you know what, tell us once. But to remind us 3 separate times from 3 separate sources to use light? No, I don't think these writers think that we are especially clever. And if they think we need 3 separate reminders to point flashlight at enemies, then they probably do think that we need clues utterly layered on us. And we'll still somehow find the inevitable ending of this game to be just a shocking reveal. Sure, you do get the good ending if you don't use the flashlight on enemies, but I have my own gripes with that and I'll get to them. Ultimately, it's all up to your interpretation, really, unless there's some official comment on it, but I don't expect so. Ellis and Bullet walk on and reach a swamp setting. This one actually looks really good, and to be honest, I was worried that the forest would wear on forever. The swamp is eerie, with this thick, heavy fog sitting squarely over it like a wet picnic blanket. These broken trees on this weird bog, thick puddles of opaque water. The game is very boring. I'll be honest, it's a 4-hour story and yet it feels extremely long, takes multiple play sessions just to get through. I was so glad to see something new. I really love a good story, but I'll also enjoy good gameplay. Sure, it's never quite easy to get the perfect combination of both or hit everything on my list, but ultimately I'm not that hard to please and I'll play through any game even if it's average. But god, this one is a hard game to play, but not in the sense of it being intentional, like that shit book The Road I had to read at school, where it's supposed to be a hard read to be a metaphor for the hard journey, but it's a hard game to play in that it honestly is just shit so far. It's boring. But I owe it to play through a game I'm reviewing even once, so here we are. The setting here, I don't know if you guys have played Dead by Daylight, but when you start a match against the Doctor, you can hear this weird thunder of his electroshock in the distance. It keeps making that sound in this game, and it had me on edge waiting for my character to comically scream in the middle of an animation and accidentally blow the generator they were working on. Suddenly, behind Bullet and Ellis are a bunch of torches facing them, presumably searchlights from the search party, or a PTSD attack and a flashback to his past, or a PTSD attack triggered by the search party. But Ellis and Bullet freak out and run away, Ellis's eyesight going all weird and pulsy. There's gunshots and you can hear the search party's walkie-talkies. Bullet and Ellis arrive in a cave lined with roots. They are under the tree. Out of nowhere, there's a flashback. It's a still image, but in the background we hear the audio of some kind of interrogation. The speaker asks Ellis to confirm. You responded to a robbery call. You got there, you pulled out your gun, you You told them to stop. The kid reached for something. Was it a weapon? They ask. No, Ellis responds. Well, then what happened? The speaker asks. Ellis replies, you know what happened. This was on me. Turns out the event referred to in the flashback was the killing of Adam Shannon, Peter Shannon's brother. Ellis remarks he could have crippled him for life. There's another flashback seeing soldiers falling off a building, dead, with a helicopter overhead, blood and gore everywhere. So we're painting a picture now specifically of veterans' PTSD. And sure, there have been some clues so far, but this, I think, is one of the most subtle build-ups and reveals in the entire game. I do honestly think with psychological stories, less is more, and they could have just kind of leaned on this one storyline, made it very rich and very interesting. But Ellis has to have all of the mental illness, and this game can't really help itself from giving Ellis all of the mental illness. So unfortunately, we don't get anything near the subtlety that this game deserves. The flashback ends. Ellis and Bullet respawn in the forest somewhere at the campsite. Oh, we're back in the forest. Okay, well, the swamp was cool, and it was a pleasure to spend 17 seconds there. We find a tape on the floor and slap it into the camcorder. Here, we watch a man burying something, laying a big heavy stone over it, wearing a weird headdress. But, I mean, he's wearing the same outfit as Ellis, and Ellis found the tape on the floor next to him when he woke up, so what kind of deductions do you expect me to make here? Ellis finds a drawing on the floor of a little kid, the victim, a child, who presumably also drew this child's drawing, and the scary killer kidnapper man, and the scary killer kidnapper man's dog. Yeah. I feel like the game doesn't expect me to know this, but it's so comically obvious that, like, it feels like parody. I couldn't tell for sure because when I googled questions about this game, the results would more often than not just be about the original film. So unfortunately, I'm gonna just have to chalk it up as one of life's biggest mysteries. After finishing this game, I did check out some reviews on Google, and basically everybody who played it clocked the twist almost immediately, which kind of fed into my assumptions that it is actually supposed to be a twist with a build-up that is supposed to be a surprise. Most reviews were lukewarm at best, but naturally, there were a few incredibly enthused fans. A cult following, you could say. I checked out some such reviews, and people who gave this game like 5 stars mainly focused on the fact that you have a dog that you can pet and give treats to. And yeah, you know, Bullet's cool. I got a bit excited when I got to give Bullet his treat as well, but like, Christ, what a low bar. And 5 stars for that? Show these people Pets 5, one of Ubisoft's first published games, and it will blow their fucking minds. One person whose review I read said it was a 4 out of 5 stars because the game doesn't have zombies in, because too many games nowadays have zombies in. One person remarked that the big reveal that Ellis is actually the kidnapper is genius. One person commented that the puzzles are so complex and provide such a good challenge that they had to consult Google several times just to get through the game. I did not encounter any puzzles when I played, so I don't know if they were mistaken or if they were leaving a review for something else. Anything that could be close to a puzzle would usually just be a simple 3-step process. For example, getting an engine running, and you'd find a tape nearby with explicit step-by-step instructions on how to do that with a visual walkthrough, sometimes even accompanied by 1 note or more, complete with another step-by-step walkthrough on how specifically to do it. So it just became a method of finding what you were looking for, which is usually just in plain sight in a lit house or something. The complexity never exceeds find the valve, turn the valve, make sure it's in the green zone on the dial, so if anything, it's more a recipe than a puzzle. Most of the 5-star reviews just involved accusing people of giving it poor reviews as people who clearly haven't played it or were too stupid to finish the tutorial, so I imagine there's a lot of spite scoring, as there often is with most games that have a cult following. Speaking of cult, under the big stone tablet there is a timber company badge buried in the mud. Ellis heads over to visit said company, knowing that the sheriff himself was paying it a visit due to reports of another missing person, and knowing where it is roughly in comparison to his position. The walkie-talkie pipes up again, and Ellis goes to answer it, but stops himself, knowing that the person on the other end isn't real. This gives way to a fairly interesting set piece where Ellis looks up and sees the forest on fire, hearing shells landing around him, and a voice on the walkie-talkie telling him that he and his unit are surrounded. You rush through it. It really is a set piece. I don't think there's a failure state here. So it's more just running from A to B and triggering the story beats around you. In fact, and I suppose this game does it the entire time, but this is really where I began to notice just how much of this game is walking in a straight line between set pieces with very little actual content taking place. Ellis gets signal again. He loses it at some point apparently, but I wasn't paying attention, and when he raises the phone to his ear, he hears a woman crying, screaming hysterically that she knew he'd do it. He puts his phone down, barely registering registering what he's heard. I also decided to put the call behind me. The strangest collectible in this game is the psychiatric note, a few of which are just scattered here and there throughout the game. The name of the patient is always obscured in some way as well. I mean, it's obviously Ellis, but his name will be ripped off or redacted or water damaged, so we never really get that confirmation. And I know that collectibles are usually not super well integrated in games. It's unlikely that there will just be a trail of diary pages one at a time left in this very linear path. In real life, I know I don't expect them to be realistic. You know, like, who is leaving all the bobbleheads everywhere in the Baker household? But I just love the idea that Ellis is like kidnapping these children, dragging them into the forest, and his jeans pockets are just like crammed full of notes that he's taken from his psychiatrist's desk, and like he's throwing kids down into the basement, and he's just got these little notes flying out of his jeans pockets and just littering the forest floor like a weird line of paper-based breadcrumbs. The papers talk about how the patient shows disdain for national symbols and military service, that he refuses to recall the event, that he exhibits emotional numbness, aggression, and disassociation to the event, that his nerves imply an undiagnosed anxiety, that he experiences vivid nightmares, that he has panic attacks and insomnia, and possible sleepwalking. So yeah, a laundry list of unfortunate mental baggage. Although, you're gonna hate me for this, but I am gonna say, implying that my character experiences vivid nightmares is also another trope that I'm a little bit tired of. Mainly because it's used to cast absolutely everything into doubt, and not in a way that is particularly clever, but more in a way that's cheap and easy, and you can use to disorientate the player without needing to come up with anything actually clever to ground it in. Often when you see games that have interesting reveals, or you can't quite trust what you've been seeing and it's actually clever, you'll look back and you can watch the story again and you can see all of the clues leading up to the big reveal. But when somebody just experiences nightmares in games, TV, films, whatever, it means that they don't actually have to be clever about it. They don't need to give you clues, they don't need to frame, they don't need to give it context, they don't need circumstances to work. It's just an easy way to like show you something that you probably wouldn't physically be able to see. I don't mind these tropes used occasionally and in moderation, but the second you tell me your main character struggles with nightmares, you start to make every scene feel untrustworthy, and sometimes the game itself feels untrustworthy, which again, for me, kind of makes me feel less invested in what's going on. Even if it's done to give that intention of untrustworthiness. Because when you show me like 5 scenes and those scenes turn out to just not have been real and they never happened, you are blurring the line between like untrustworthy and pointless. I know different people feel differently about these kinds of tropes, and this one is very much a personal preference thing. This is entirely an opinion-based comment to make. But the second anybody pulls the maybe it's all a dream card with me, I just disassociate. Don't care. You know, I say that, but maybe a story of weird contradictory dream sequences would be more interesting than this. I follow Ellis as he walks for a few minutes in the dark, picking up some valve or some shit, and then some more walking, then a rail cart is working, then he gets on it and there's some railing. No, not like what your parents do. Some scripted jump scares, then Ellis gets off, messes around with another valve, and then there's some more railing. Ellis calls Jess saying, I see things and I don't know if they're real or not, and I don't know which is worse. I'm seeing bad memories. Jess is supportive, but she's not called for any help for him yet, and he's been out in the woods for several hours, if not more than a day, so at this point my bet was on her not being real. Either that or she's just in this for the veteran discount, being that Ellis has, by my estimates, been in the forest for at least 1 full night and 1 full day, based on what we've seen, and Jess has not really lifted a finger to help whatsoever. We finally reach a new visually interesting area, a timber company in a huge swampy clearing in the woods, surrounded by dead foliage, old rotting trees, rancid dirty lakes, dark thick fog hanging over these squat log houses. Very cool, I like this bit. Ellis walks into one and finds a fire burning in an oven. It's old, but not abandoned. Someone lives here. We see a video called The Chase, where the cameraman is chasing a stranger, laughing maniacally, but it's so obviously Ellis's voice again. We follow the route the chase took into a logging building and find a fairly okay suspenseful moment. Noises clatter above us, blood dripping between the cracks of the wooden boards above, but I'm fairly confident I'm the unwitting bad guy, and so I'm not too concerned about the danger here. here. I saw it, reads a note I find. A man carrying the pelt of a skinned human, Carver. I couldn't tell if the note signed off as Carver, or if Carver is the name of the person the note writer saw. I later found this to be the latter. Eventually, I make my way back up the stairs, finding a humble scene ahead. A white sheet, which, when pulled back, revealed a heavily mutilated man, covered in bloody bandages, loudly groaning in pain. I interacted with an item on his chest. I couldn't quite see what it was, I think it was dog tags, and the scene suddenly changed. Ellis was now standing in front of a man who'd been shoved into a timber saw. I do not feel like it was the same man. Now, so weirdly, Ellis called the Veterans Affairs Office first. I'd like to report the passing of a missing veteran, Ellis murmured solemnly. Can you please let his family know? Like, Jesus Christ, my dude. What an initial first instinct. Ellis walked outside from honouring this past veteran and runs into Carver. Wow, maybe it was actually an elaborate double bluff, but he still has Ellis's voice and a covered face, so probably not. Plus, we just found a note about Ellis having vivid nightmares, so I imagine that was a bit of very specific foreshadowing for the following sequence. Ellis drifts in and out of consciousness, and we hear him explaining that the event this game has been leading up to has been him accidentally leading his men into an ambush, culminating in 9 injured and 6 dead, after which he had to leave the military due both to his own shame over the incident, as well as his furious, what's a higher up in the military? His furious general manager? His El Capitan? Carver observes, I was weak like you once. See this knife? I remember holding it against my wrist, pressing it deeper and deeper, wanting to end it all. Ellis wakes up and Carver is gone, which is why I think the whole sequence was probably a nightmare, but he's woken up with a tape apparently left by Carver asking Ellis to bring him some little white branches from the burned white tree. And so the walking segments begin. As Ellis, there's now a roughly 30-minute plus block of time where we just walk for several minutes at once, our route ahead of us basically pitch black, using the camera to see where we need to go. And in that entire 30 minutes, I don't think a single on-screen event happened, just occasional talking, and if you've seen my other horror game videos, you'll know I'm a massive baby who can't handle atmosphere on any level, but I was basically fine with this. I didn't even realise enemies were there until Carver decided to backseat for me, saying, too close, Ellis, too close. Like, okay, thanks fella, I'll get back on the path. I can't tell if all the walking you're doing is supposed to make you feel lost and isolated, but this is a 4-hour game, and the story beats of the final 90 minutes are very, very stretched out. And I can't tell if that is for the aforementioned reason or if they're just trying to make a game of any justifiable length. The thing is, I don't mind games that are 2 hours, 90 minutes. For example, What Remains of Edith Finch, not a particularly long game, but a very memorable game. I feel like if you have a short story to tell, you tell a short story. If Edith Finch had 30 minutes of walking down long corridors with no landmarks or anything to look at, so few less people are going to have finished that game. I actually started to count the minutes that Ellis was walking in the dark down these vaguely linear paths, doing nothing, with nothing happening around him. In the final 90 minutes of this game, you start to be walking between 5 and 10 minutes at a time while nothing happens around you. It's a pretty appalling use of time, and I could just imagine my character on some kind of hamster ball with like a rotating environment around me, giving the impression that I was walking forwards while the writers desperately tried to come up with whatever I should be doing next. At one point, Carver just has you walking for him, and he just keeps going, yeah, that's right, over and over and over, and it's so weird and awkward. He then sings a nursery rhyme about blind mice. Nothing happens. We walk for 7 minutes. After long, drawn-out segments of quiet walking, I came across a stag on the floor. Skin it, ordered Carver, and Ellis very easily skins this stag on the spot, presumably a way to foreshadow to us that Ellis killed and skinned the sheriff. He makes an effigy out of twigs and stag hide, and Carver tells him to give it to Bullet to sniff for a new scent. Ellis comments, I can't do that, he'll just follow my scent. And Carver's like, yep, and I'm like, yep, and we're both looking at Ellis, and he just goes, wow, gosh, that is unusual, and off we go again. You're like a bird in barbed wire, Carver observes. The more you struggle, the more it hurts. The only way to fix it is to surrender. I wonder what situation the game might be trying to set up here. It's probably not important. After a moment, we find a gun under a napkin. Carver tells us to kill the dog. We refuse. I don't know if Ellis will do it under other circumstances, but it felt like an odd one out kind of scene. There was some weird rag on the floor, and I absolutely couldn't tell what it was, even when finding the same moment on YouTube Let's Plays and rewinding it over and over. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. My brother said it was the headwear of a woman that Ellis stabbed in Iraq, which we actually don't really know about yet, but I'll take him. Ellis gasps in horror and goes, no, that's impossible, and Bullet runs off, but my eyes were just refusing to cooperate, and so this moment was lost on me. Bullet falls and gets hurt hurt, silly bitch, and you pick him up and there's some more walking. Probably between like 7 and 10 minutes of more walking, vaguely forwards in a very linear map. This takes the absolute piss. Nothing happens. Ellis hears whispers. He blinks and Bullet is suddenly gone again. There's now more walking. We have to look for Bullet. Again, minutes and minutes of walking. The walkie-talkie occasionally crackling to life with phrases like, "Did you hear what he did? I wonder if he'll snap and kill his wife." But I couldn't hear half of them over the excited tune of Ellis's pedometer telling him that he'd not only reached but exceeded his step goal for today. MyFitnessPal loves this man. We find a tape showing a man following Ellis, but it's obviously part of a dream sequence as immediately thereafter the little gully he's in fills with water. Carver appears saying, "Try as you might, you can only do harm." We see a flashback back to Jess again, and then a flashback to Ellis holding a knife standing over a bed soaked in blood. Right. Okay. Another tape called The Reveal. We see a guy, definitely Ellis, shoving Peter Shannon into a basement. We find a note, another one, talking about the patient who is leaving Burkittsville to start military service. I guess these notes have been littered around from the start to build a profile we'd always see as other, and maybe come to assume were notes about Carver, but if you figure it out from the beginning, it's not especially impactful. From what we gather from the note, it seems Ellis went into the military with mental health issues so bad that he needed to be incarcerated, which sounds like an L for whoever screened Ellis. You know guys, there is a lot to be said for inclusivity, but maybe let's not take on and give weaponry to the person whose undisclosed and vaguely described mental health causes him to snap and act so dangerously that he needs to be locked away for periods of time. But hey, whatever stops you from preying on college kids, I suppose. We're in the house now, or at least I assume so, the house from the film. I guess it's supposed to be a moment of awesome, wow, Easter egg, cool reference, but after all that time spent squatting in piles of leaves in the forest, it was honestly just a welcome break to be somewhere else. There are notes on the wall saying, "You are for her." I get a text from Jess saying, "This is too much, I won't let you drag me down again," which was surprising as the one impactful twist I assumed was coming was the reveal that Ellis had killed her. Turns out she just doesn't really like him. As we walk through the house, we start to get walkie-talkie communication from past Ellis, and we tell him to turn the headlights on. So it was us, but is Ellis just imagining this? Visions of dudes in hats crouching on the floor appear, and the witch whispers to Ellis, telling him to do it. You can just walk on, I suppose. It's a little bit meta, trying to encourage you to think for yourself, but as we'll learn, the binary for what this game considers good and evil has probably tipped so badly in your favour already due to the silly arbitrary logic of this game's moral choice that, well, you know what, I'll explain it when it comes to it. Then there's just more walking around the house, following the fairly linear route, occasionally hearing noises or seeing the red stickman figures on your camera screen that you have to creep around in a way that is neither careful nor quiet. There's one decent jump scare at the start of the second stage that had me squeaking like someone had just dropped a slug down the back of my trousers, but then some really shit ones, including one that I missed every single time, where some bald NPC guy, Adam Shannon, just spawns in front of you with his name in white paint behind him, looking like a confused Wix employee. The audio of the robbery Peter Shannon's brother was shot and killed by Ellis during plays. Visions of people stood facing the corners of the rooms, sounds of police sirens asking where Ellis is. This scene is actually really impactful. This is really creepy and tense, and so far has probably been the only scary part of this entire game. We walk into a room and hear on the TV that the robbery suspect was killed by a police officer and was unarmed, but I mean, this is the United States. The headline was probably far more likely to go, "The hoodlum suspect with a suspected history of marijuana consumption was wounded in a shootout following a violent robbery," and then Ellis would just get paid leave. "I'm to blame for that," Ellis says, walking into a flickering corridor of cheers. "It's not where it started, is it?" asks the Blair Witch in one of those whispers you do when you're trying to whisper loudly and clearly, but it makes your voice sound really forced. Like the voice actor who did the voice for Mafala in the Whispering Door quest in Skyrim. That always bothers me when I hear it. I hate it. Ellis heads downstairs into the basement, stepping into water which sloshes around his ankles while he walks, seeing the bodies of, presumably, the military unit he accidentally killed. Then more walking, just underground. Carver goes, "See what you've done? Try as you might, you can only do harm." Ellis is forced into the corner of the room, shouting at the chorus of voices to stop. Then more walking, more hallucinations. Ellis reaches the basement, calling for Peter. Again, we found the tape recording in the bunker earlier. He knows Peter isn't here. Carver calls, "Did you really think it would be that easy? That he'd be here? You could save him? Go home a hero?" Ellis is angry and threatens to kill him, and Carver invites it. "The key is under the table," he says, "and I'm waiting on the other side." There's an interesting sequence here where it flashes between the woods and the, I assume, location where Ellis's unit were ambushed and all of his fellow servicemen died. We see that, while begging a woman to be quiet in her home, Ellis stabbed her to death to keep her from shouting for help. We then flash back to now, finding Carver, finally. So, there are two endings in the Blair Witch game. A a good ending and a bad ending. How you get these endings is just as arbitrary as the divide in endings themselves. I have a theory about it. So I think they started with the most binary possible. If you obey the witch, you get the bad ending, which makes sense. That would be clever to me. But the writing makes it very obvious that you're not supposed to get the good ending first at all. You're supposed to retry and break the cycle. However, I'm guessing that too many game testers accidentally got the good ending first try by disobeying the witch, so the designers just smacked tons more weird requirements in. One such requirement, and likely the requirement that will cost you the good ending, is that you're not supposed to use light to kill the enemies in this game despite being told to multiple times. You're supposed to sneak past them, an entirely passive playthrough. But it's so stupid. The second you look at this any closer, you realise how stupid it is. They're the witch's minions, right? So why not flash them with the torch? And if you're walking around with the torch out, you'll definitely flash them by accident and kill them anyway. Oh, but they represent the kidnapped people. Then why are they attacking me? And why does a flash of light kill them? I can't save them. They're already dead, so I don't need to spare them. Don't tell me the torch represents a gun. If we're going to start flinging those kinds of assumptions around, it may as well represent a stapler. Whatever the fuck you want it to represent, it doesn't matter. The criteria for being allowed to see the good ending is so ridiculous and so nonsensical, especially in a story about mental health. It's bollocks, and you can't convince me otherwise, just a reason to force the player to try again if they want the good boy ending. If you get the bad ending, Carver says he can't hear her anymore and that he is free, and that she's always wanted you to become me, and Ellis becomes Carver, continuing the cycle of murder. Surprise, surprise. If you get the good ending, Ellis insists that he's not like Carver, and oh damn, Carver reveals, you are me. What a surprise. I'm all you ever have. I am what you become. Ellis bleeds out on the floor and dies, having killed himself to end the cycle of murder. Ellis accepted his demons, but never allowed them to take control, says a final screen, and the cycle was broken. And there we have it. So let's talk about it. And before we get on with the next section, spoilers ahead for Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, Martha is Dead, and The Medium. Thankfully, the portrayal of suicide in this game isn't as gratuitous as others I've seen lately. It's far more of an indirect visual metaphor, killing Carver and somehow dying as a result, but the actual literal representation is spot on. Ellis kills himself to prevent himself from abusing others. And the game sets this up very specifically. Ellis has no idea he's committing acts of kidnap and murder, and short of having someone lock him away, he can't take any steps to prevent it. The story is very clear that he is an unstoppable force of nature. He is too far gone and too dangerous to be alive anymore, and he takes it upon himself to die for the sake of everybody else. The noble suicide is a trope in gaming that I take kind of massive issue with. The idea that you are so mentally ill, struggling with so much trauma, so broken that you need to do the world a favour and humbly take it upon yourself to end your life for the betterment of everybody around you, is hardly the kind of idea I like to see pushed as a good ending in any game. If anything, it's a bad ending. You know, this isn't Halo Reach, this isn't who can have the noblest self-sacrifice competition. I think there is a difference between self-sacrifice tropes and suicide tropes, don't get me wrong. Self-sacrifice tropes I think are fine when built up. Suicide tropes, I think, are very difficult to get right. You know, it's not some kind of solemn duty. This isn't Halo Reach. This is fucking Burkittsville. Get therapy. And it is demonstrated as a good thing here. Ellis is well-intentioned. He tries really hard. He wants to be a part of his community, but he's broken. He's unfixable. Stuff happened when he was younger, and now he's so dangerous that he's just a ticking time bomb. And in the final moments of the game, he decides to do the right thing, and he kills himself. Let's juxtapose this with one of my favourite games, and a game with a very compassionate portrayal of mental illness, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. See, when Ninja Theory took on the gargantuan task of portraying a genuine and compassionate representation of schizophrenia, arguably the most stigmatised mental illness recognised today, they had their hands full. They juggled enough plates for the story to collapse under any single mistake, and then still had the gall to say, yeah, let's also set these plates on fire. I've never seen a writing team so readily charge into the Helm's Deep of psychological portrayals as the ones at Ninja Theory, but they pulled it off so well. Those of you who have played this game will know that they did an excellent job in creating a main character that is human, vulnerable, and, as an opposite to Ellis, redeemable. In fact, there's nothing the game ever suggests Senua needs to be redeemed from. Senua experiences all the common symptoms of schizophrenia. She hears voices, sees hallucinations, it's implied she suffers suffers some severe delusions, but she's never shown to be dangerous to anyone. She's not a ticking time bomb, prone to losses of consciousness that culminate in missing children wandering around in the woods. She doesn't disassociate for hours to throw old cigarette cartons out into the leaves to be found later. Her mental health is not an opponent to her, and while it does form the foundation that the story happens on, it's almost secondary to her real story, reuniting with her lost love. Senua is loyal, dedicated, she loves and is loved, she is happy and content, being a part of a community that accepts her. Her partner is very patient with her. He helps her with her mental health struggles, and although she feels like a burden to him sometimes, it's never implied by the game that she is a burden. More that this is just a symptom of her feelings of insecurity and her fears of being left alone. Senua's mental illness is a part of her life, not a demon she needs to slay. It's just there. Sure, sometimes her schizophrenia gives her weird powers, so maybe that side of the spectrum is a little bit romanticized, but I think what's important is that despite picking up one of the mental health issues with the worst reputation, if anyone's heard the term going schizo or she's an absolute schizo when referring to people who are erratic or dangerous, Ninja Theory put in some serious legwork and delivered a representation that is universally beloved. Sure, the combat's not great, but the combat doesn't matter. A lot of games insist that they consult psychiatrists when making their games, but it's rare that you'll ever actually see that in practice. Credit where credit's due, I quizzed my super clever psychiatrist friend Nerdshrink about this. I'll link his Twitch in the description below if you ever want to go and quiz him, but I know he's super busy at the moment. Hopefully he'll be able to catch any messages. But he kind of filled me in on all the extra process that they went through for Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I feel like it's so easy for studios to make a very token gesture out of consulting psychologists and psychiatric professionals. But it seems to me that they're either brought in when the script is already done and therefore they can only make light amendments, or so late into the development process that the game is essentially already made and now they can only really add tweaks. It never really seems that they are introduced in like the most fundamental levels of research. Because I feel like a psychiatrist would walk into so many of these writing rooms and just be like, what is this? Like, and just upheave it all like it's just shit, and tell them to start again from scratch. Hellblade not only brought in some psychiatrists, but also psychologists and neuroscientists that work with paranoia, as well as people who suffer it themselves, and work to understand how exactly Senua would hear the voices, the content of the stuff she hears, the frequency, the audio quality, the source of the voices, whether Senua would be commanded by the voices, or whether the voices would cast judgment on her. Bearing in mind, Senua also technically loses her final fight. Encountering the final boss, she doesn't conquer it, but she doesn't succumb to it either. Nor does she commit suicide. You don't die. There's no condescending monologue about how she tried hard but couldn't fight the inevitable. There's no resolution. Her cycle continues, but she gains a greater understanding of it where total relief isn't possible. It's not glorified growth, it's just a continued fight. The rot, or whatever it's called, mechanic is a great example of this. It tells you at the beginning that if you die too much, your game will be completely over and you have to start anew. But it never happens. There is no complete fail state despite saying there would be. This is a beautiful metaphor for mental health work, as it basically is saying that regardless of how much it beats you down, there's always a chance to fight back. There's always progress that you can make. Compared to Ellis, the details of his undisclosed, vague, and non-specific symptoms of mental illness are delivered to us via scraps of paper rather than moments of demonstration. His mental illness is used as like a twist and a story beat, whereas for Senua, her mental illness is just background noise. We are told the technical side of things with as little commitment to detail as possible by Bloober. We're given a list of symptoms and PTSD is described to us, but the game makes it clear that Ellis had mental health issues before he ever had PTSD. The PTSD just exacerbated them. But this game never properly explains nor lays out to us what the matter is, meaning that the game can just kind of make it whatever it wants, in whatever intensity, to just get across the message that it needs to get across at the time. Blair Witch never commits to naming a mental illness that Ellis has, because then it would get caught with its trousers around its ankles when it starts just yanking out random symptoms, like loss of time, split personalities, kidnapping children, because then it would be held accountable for making vastly worse the stigma of whichever mental illness it's trying to help its audience gain a better understanding of, or is trying to tell a story through the medium of. I don't consider this game to be doing anything along the lines of raising awareness. Like, Martha is Dead had a mental health hotline at the end of it This game isn't anything like that. It's not trying to teach us and help us gain a better understanding of mental health, and yet it is still somehow an insensitive mess full of cheap scares. Like when Martha Is Dead pretended to write a story about bipolar disorder with a suicide hotline at the end, and then accidentally portrayed the mental illness as a ticking time bomb that will cause you to murder your entire family, the Blair Witch grapples with and ultimately shits the bed hard on trying to deliver any kind of faithful examination of mental health. And failing this good faith demonstration of mental health, it's literally just a horror game, and the mental health themes are just a sad cop-out. Indeed, this is another game in like a conga line of disappointments, where mental health is just played disingenuously for scares. And the only issue I have with tropes like this is that mental health doesn't really scare me. Suicide doesn't really scare me, because I've never been in those shoes and I don't understand. Not that I'm immune to those things. I think anybody could slip into depression. Anybody's life can be affected by a sudden glitch in their brain chemistry that catches on. But ultimately, these things aren't really what I'm scared of. The fear of compulsion, yeah, being forced to take my own life because of something I can't explain, that's really scary. But the idea that tomorrow I might meet a scary imagined version of me that kills kids, and I have to kill myself to stop them? Yeah. Like, it's just not the same kind of intimate, relatable horror of the original film that this game is based off and consequently just bums off, where you could literally just be walking in the woods one day only to accidentally walk into territory that you didn't realise existed, and an unfathomable evil might decide to take issue with you and kill you. I mean, the students in Blair Witch know what they're going into that territory for, but you know what I mean. Like, unfathomable evil. And to be honest, the original movie, despite not being that scary, is still far scarier than whatever this game could call itself. People who have found themselves in the headspace of suicidal ideation might see this differently, although more often than not in the comments that I received on my video about The Medium, the other game by Bloober, it seems as though people who have found themselves in these difficult moments only really see it as cheap when those difficult moments are used for scares, where the issues are often dehumanized and disrespected at best, or worse, used in a way that only worsens the stigma against those mental illnesses. Am I speaking for everybody? No, of course not. I'm sure there are people this does speak to, but like if you spit out of your car window enough, you will eventually hit somebody with it. Bloober were just gobbing into the wind with this game. Any connection that it made is a pure act of God, not a carefully guided route to self-realization and relatability. So yeah, I would be interested in knowing, is suicide and mental health as a concept something that directly and honestly terrifies you? And to further that, have you ever played a game with those themes where the portrayals of suicide and mental health specifically have been scary? Or is it more the peripheral themes of their scary ghosts walking around too? Good atmosphere? Or has a dramatically morbid ending ever actually hit you? I feel as though games often get around this by introducing the idea of compulsion, being forced into something that you can only watch in horror as it unfolds. If you're a fan of the works of Junji Ito, you see compulsion used a ton in his work. The most famous example, I think, is a short story called The Enigma of Amigara Fault, where an earthquake unearths massive walls, all containing perfect cutouts of human bodies. Only, these holes, despite having been underground for thousands of years, bear perfect resemblance to every single living person on the planet. And once you see your hole, for example broadcasted to you via the news, you are overtaken by the irresistible urge to climb into it. You are obsessed with it. You cannot escape this urge. It is all you want now. The only way to survive this is just not to see your hole in the first place, but no one tells you this. The odds are stacked against you from the beginning. It's about that feeling of dropping your phone off the side of the bridge, those intrusive thoughts and what would happen if they took control. However, a more relevant piece of Junji's work is called Hanging Balloons, where balloons begin to spawn around Japan, each bearing a perfectly identical face to somebody in the populace. These balloons have nooses. They float around until they find their targets, and then they sweep them up and hang them. Before long, everyone is hanging from these balloons, floating around in the sky, except one girl trapped in her house, starving to death, alone, having seen her whole family taken by the balloons that now fly around her house looking at her through the windows. The comic ends on a cliffhanger, but with no escape, no options, what would you do? In games, however, this compulsion and desperation, where suicide is the only answer, becomes an issue that's difficult to translate to the player. Games where characters are, say, mind-possessed or mind-controlled, like Madison, aren't especially impactful because it's so hard to get that across to your player, especially when, like with Madison, this isn't built up to in any meaningful way. Seriously, watch my video on it. I love that game for what it is, but the ending is just shit. In games where suicide is shown to us as a character's last resort, like The Medium specifically, we often see situations where stories are written so particularly so that suicide is the only option at the end. But this often leaves gaping plot holes that, if they had been filled, would probably have provided alternative routes for the main characters to take. And especially in the case of The Medium, where the suicide occurs because a little girl who suffered horrible sexual abuse as a child is ruining everything for everybody else, we again get a situation where a traumatized person is so unfixable that their only option is death because they're hurting everybody around them by continuing to live. Often, suicide feels like it's become a good place to end a story when development time is running low and they just need to wrap things up. If you have 10 unfinished plot points and you've written yourself into a corner but your budgets are at their limit, it seems to be all too common to just whack a suicide into the game just to finish it off easy. Like, oh no, my story's half-baked. Better make my main character kill themselves. Somebody will give it Game of the Year. For me, suicide is sad, definitely. Suicide endings can be sad if done well. Mental health is one of the most bitter and difficult realities of life to swallow. But these kinds of portrayals need a lot of legwork put in for your audience to even slightly begin empathizing with your main characters. And a 4-hour romp through a boring forest, listening to the ramblings of a main character that isn't especially well fleshed out, just kind of isn't it. Not to say Ellis isn't a complex character. By horror game standards, he starts very strong, but we catch him at the end of his arc, not during it. All of Ellis's development has happened already, off screen, and that really doesn't help us take the enormous steps towards empathy this game expects us to take. And then it just goes, how do we show how mentally ill he is? Ah yes, let's have him kill himself. Easy peasy. Bearing in mind, I'm not talking about self-sacrifice tropes. They're largely fine, unless you're The Medium, in which case they're pee-pee poo-poo. If there's one thing I ever learned from studying history, besides the fact that there exists a softcore porn parody of Robin Hood called The Virgins of Sherwood Forest, it's that if you're going to compare someone or something to the Nazis, for example, you need to be 100% sure that you are making a one-to-one comparison. And if there's anything I've learned about playing fucking loads of games about mental health, it's that you need to be absolutely 100% certain that you are doing it the credit that it deserves. And it also helps if the games that explored these themes were actually good too, but apparently that's just too much to ask. Anyway, thanks for watching my video on the cardinal sin of gaming and how much I think this game is a bit crap, because it really is. It's 4 hours long and it took me fucking weeks to drag my ass through it like a dog with worms. A lot of the positive reviews about this game are usually spiked reviews, so people who rate it 10 out of 10 and then spend all the review character limit talking about how people who didn't enjoy it are just morons who aren't able to pick up a controller competently. And to that I say, what of it? But in summary of Bloober's Blair Witch game, we have an absurd exaggeration of harmful mental health stigma, check. A main character who is too broken to justify continuing living, check. Arbitrary moral choice influences and 2 binary endings to force 2 playthroughs, check. A good ending where you nobly decide to end your life to save others, check. 4 hours of fuck all story or interesting content, check. Yeah, just watch the movie. Or if you want a good Bloober game, just play Observer, it's really good. Anyway, thanks for being here. If you enjoyed the video, smack that like button, drop a comment about your own experiences, and subscribe to me here on YouTube for more gaming content. I release reviews and rankings as often as possible, so if that sounds like your thing, make sure to stick around for more. Thank you to my patrons again for their unending support. Reminder to head over to my Patreon for those 5-minute reviews for any Patreon tier. And a special thank you to Julia, Carissa Fulcher, and Sam Jones for being my highest tier patrons. I love you 3, thank you so much. Anyway, see you guys in the next video.